definitely looking forward to seeing how this all shakes out tonight. And so let's get into some of our top draft picks for Alabama. You've got 6 Alabama players that will represent those that were invited to the virtual draft this year. And so you've got Tua Tagovailoa, Jedrick Wills, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Xavier McKinney, Terrell Lewis. Those are your 6. And let's just start off the top. Tua Tagovailoa, one of the biggest storylines really throughout much of the season. And now as he's, entered his name into the NFL draft and has been preparing for that, it's kind of crazy. I turn on the TV and I see the Muscle Milk commercial and I'm like, wait, this is weird. Like, it's hard for me to compute that he's no longer an Alabama football player and he can get paid to do commercials and stuff now. But with that being said, just your overall takeaways on his draft stock right now as he enters into this kind of unknown, territory with a lot of question marks surrounding his, fragile state and injuries and all those things that go with it, but also his ability as a quarterback.
Yeah, there's even the FedEx ad that he did. I think I saw the tweet last night.
Yes,
he had a FedEx
right?
box, and he was wearing FedEx colors, which are green and orange, which of course are pretty similar to the Miami Dolphins colors.
Uh-huh.
And obviously, the Dolphins are probably the most popular team where he's been mocked over the last couple of months. But like you mentioned, there's been a lot of back and forth and discussion and debate about him. And there's been a lot of mock drafts that have gone away from the Dolphins picking him. And there's been reports about people in the Dolphins building not being totally sold on him. And look, these last couple weeks, when I covered the NFL, the 2 or 3 weeks before the draft I just almost shut everything out because I didn't believe a lot of what was coming out. You talk to the people around the league, there's so much smoke screens that come out this time where teams are trying to obscure their plans and putting out essentially fake news. And, you just can't really believe everything you hear, even up until the hours before the draft. So I don't know if I totally buy the Dolphins not being in on Tua, where a couple months ago maybe people thought that they were. I think at the end of the day, I would not be surprised if they take him. But at the end of the day, I also will not be surprised if they don't. So that at that point, then the question is, would the Chargers take him at 6? Mm-hmm. And the Chargers have a need at quarterback. Phillip Rivers just left to go to the Colts this offseason. They do have Tyrod Taylor, the former Bills quarterback, who had a couple decent years, not great years in Buffalo. And, they could take a quarterback. They may not. So those are the 2 teams people are going to be watching. But there are variables there where there's been talk about the Dolphins moving up to number 3 and potentially taking an offensive tackle. That would move the Lions down into the 5th spot. A lot can happen. A lot could change within those first 10 picks. But I don't know if there's going to be this Aaron Rodgers type slide for Tua that some people have predicted. And at the end of the day, I think Tua's camp has done a pretty good job of putting out the information they need to put out as far as the medicals. I mean, they had him go to the Titans team doctor, who is a pretty well-known hip specialist, and Tua was already working out in Nashville. That's where he's done his training with Trent Dilfer, and they sent all those scans around the league. So, I mean, teams can say, hey, it wasn't our doctor, we don't trust him, but I don't know if it's really rational to doubt the medical side of Tua at this point, at least about the hip. I think it's pretty safe to say the hip is fine. So if you're not taking him because of medical, you're just taking him because of fear of future injury.
Right.
And, I mean, there's been people, Nick Saban talked about it. He has talked about it multiple times. It's hard to call a guy injury prone. I think the issue with Tua is that he tries to extend these plays and he gets himself in trouble. But I don't know if his body is any more fragile than anybody else's, and he's a pretty well-built guy. I don't know if because he's had those 2 ankle injuries, because he's had a hip injury, that it's going to cause something in the future. What's going to prevent the injury is him throwing the ball away, and that's ultimately what teams should try to get him to do.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And I think transparency has been key. And I do feel like, they've obviously been transparent through this whole process. And, I'm with you because obviously as the doctors and whatnot have produced reports and obviously statements, and you've heard from Dr. Lyle Kane and you've heard from all his doctors throughout the process. And it does make you wonder, of course they're going to, promote him and shed positive light on him. But I truly believe that they've done their due diligence to make sure that they've been as transparent as possible and kind of eliminating any doubt that could be out there. And I think that's just who Tua is. That's who his family is. That's sort of what he's built on. And, I feel there's a level of authenticity there that will carry over in the league, which makes him, again, if there is concerns about the injuries, I think the other side of it, aside from the skill set, you're getting a great guy and a great quarterback no matter what. And so it'll be interesting to see where he ends up, and exciting as well. So moving down the line, offensive tackle Jedrick Wills, looking at potentially a top 15 pick, started at right tackle the last 2 seasons. He earned several honors, first and second team honors. Really one of the best overall, best all around that offensive tackle position. What are your thoughts on where he ends up?
Yeah, I think the big question with him for teams will be, can he play left tackle, because he played exclusively on the right side at Alabama, and part of that was because Tua was a lefty, and when you have a lefty quarterback, your more valuable tackle side is going to be the right. And then in the NFL, there are no lefty quarterbacks. There hasn't been in 3 or 4 years. I mean, ESPN did a big story on that Tua is going to be the first lefty quarterback in quite a little time here. So all the left tackles are generally considered the better player in the NFL. So that's, if you're going to draft him high, that's probably where you're going to put him. I think you want him to be comfortable with all the movements on that side of the line. It's kind of mirrored in your head. Some players are good at doing it, some players aren't. And Jedrick's been working on that this offseason. He has said that he's comfortable doing it. Nick Saban said yesterday that he should be fine over there. So if teams are comfortable with that, then I think he's going to be a top 10 pick. But the problem for him is that there's a couple other really good tackles in this draft. Andrew Thomas from Georgia, Becton, the other guy who's been talked about in that spot, and there's one more who, unfortunately, I'm blanking on his name, but there's 4 tackles really in the top 12 picks or so, where it just depends on which teams like which player and which guy is on the board. So I think the popular spot for him has been 8, 9. For the Cardinals, the Jags at 9, and then the Jets at 11 have been another team that he's been picked for. But I've seen him as high as 4 to the Giants. So again, it's just a matter of which team and their offensive line coach and their scouts and their GMs have sat down and said, we like this guy more than the other good tackles that are out there.
All right, and so we move down the list. Of course, another guy invited to the virtual draft without surprise to anybody. You got wide receiver Jerry Jeudy, another top 10, top 15 pick, super explosive kid. He's the Blitnikoff Award winner, had a breakout season last year. Very quiet and reserved, but at the same time, his skill set speaks for itself. Came on with a strong finish this season. So how do you think that really, how he kind of put a big bow on his final season? How do you think that plays in the eyes of the NFL draft and the NFL scouts, I should say?
Yeah, I think it certainly helps. I don't know if the overall season, especially the first couple months, were quite to the level what he did the year before,
right,
when he won the award, and was really viewed as the best wide receiver in the country. I think there's still debate on whether he is the best receiver coming out. I mean, CeeDee Lamb has certainly got some attention in that regard, and some people out there think Henry Ruggs is the best receiver, and it just depends on what teams want. I mean, if teams want a receiver who has one great skill, then Ruggs might get elevated a little bit because of his speed. But if teams are looking for an all-around receiver, Jeudy certainly has a better case for that, and CeeDee Lamb as well. So again, it's just how these teams scout and how they value certain traits. And Jerry doesn't really have a trait that stands out quite as much as Ruggs. I mean, his route running, I think, would be the closest elite trait that he has. But overall, he's probably a better wide receiver at running each route and going across the middle and catching the ball, and not just being a speed guy. And Henry Ruggs, I think, has a case to be a lot more than the speed guy too. But I think Jerry has shown more overall. So, the Broncos at 15 have been a pretty popular team where you've seen Jerry talked about, but he could go a little bit earlier. The Raiders, I think, are at 12, and they could pick him as well. I mean, it's somewhere in those low teens I would expect Jeudy to go. I'd be surprised if he falls much further than that.
And then you bring up Henry Ruggs, kind of next on our list here. Another guy that is expected to be in the early to mid first round. Just your overall thoughts on him. And again, I think it's all subjective, whether he goes first or obviously, Jerry Jeudy. But what is your overall takeaway from his abilities and how that translates in the NFL?
Yeah, I mean, my issue just watching, and again, I kind of flew into the season in the second week, and I hadn't really, watched these guys very closely before this past season. But I thought he did some great things those first few weeks. Southern Miss, South Carolina, Ole Miss, those games. I thought he had, pretty strong performances. But then he had that hip injury against Ole Miss,
right?
And that really seemed to slow him down after that. I remember in October, November, really up until the Iron Bowl, when I think he did some more things in that game. But just you kind of forgot about him for a little while. And part of that was because Devontae Smith was really emerging. And I think Devontae Smith could have a case to be, the best wide receiver in this group 4, 5, 6 years from now when we're looking back at what they've done in the NFL. So for me, Ruggs, I think the issue is, if he gets bumped around a little bit, if he gets bumped around at the line,
I need you to hone in on it before it's pro day and combine day.
What he showed,
if I tell you it's a weakness of what I see, that means over the next week and a half before you go,
level. If he gets pressed on the line of scrimmage, can he come off of that? Can he do a little bit more than just fly past guys? So that's the question with him, but I don't think it's going to force him out of the first round or anything. It might push him back a little bit behind where CeeDee Lamb is and behind where Jerry Jeudy is. I think the most popular spot I've seen for Ruggs has been 21 to the Eagles. So, probably a few spots lower than the other guys.
Yeah, as we kind of wrap up those top 6 guys that, like we talked about, have been invited to the virtual draft, Xavier McKinney, Xavier McKinney, a safety. I had the opportunity to talk to him a couple weeks ago, and he's just got such a great personality, and you can just tell he's really excited for this opportunity. I don't think the stage is too big for him. He's just ambitious, anxious. He's a first-team All-SEC selection. He led the team, I think, with 95 tackles or whatever. So just overall, your thoughts and expectations for a guy like him and how, his abilities as a safety kind of translate in the league and sort of what he's able to take from being part of this Nick Saban defense and as it translates at the next level.
Yeah, I think he has a pretty strong case to be the best safety in the draft. Now, does that mean he's like Minkah Fitzpatrick and should be going in the first, few picks, first 10 picks? Probably not. I think he's probably a notch below that level, and that's why in a lot of cases he's been mocked in the latter half of the first round. But he's a very clean prospect, like you said. There's not questions about the character or the off-field or injuries like Tua. Just a guy who I think teams will feel pretty good just picking and putting into a starting spot and not really having to worry a whole lot about what might happen. And that might not mean that he's a 10-time Pro Bowler who goes to Hall of Fame, but he certainly is looks like a pretty good player at the NFL level. And a team like the Patriots, to be honest, Patriots picked 23. They look for players who have a strong character. And I think McKinney would probably check that box. And the versatility, too, I think is something that really appealed to teams where he's played deep safety, he's played closer to the line of scrimmage, he's played in the slot. And again, a team like the Patriots loves things like that. Does he make it to 23? Probably not. I've seen him as high as 17 to the Cowboys. I think that's been a pretty popular pick. I have seen him as pretty low, too. I saw a mock draft yesterday. He was in the 3rd round. I think that's a little bit crazy.
Oh, wow.
I think at worst, he's probably early 2nd round. And I think even then, if he starts slipping into that spot, then I think you'll see a team trade up to get him. But again, somewhere in the late teens to 20s, I think is probably a safe bet for him.
All right, and kind of closing things up on this end, linebacker Terrell Lewis, he's somebody that got hit with injury bug, in his career, has battled the injuries, kind of had that unfortunate luck as it pertains to injuries, but really it's kind of created some buzz for himself, especially after his performance at the Senior Bowl. What, if any, are their concerns with the injuries, and do you think that plays a big part in where he ends up getting drafted?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the injuries themselves in the sense that he could get hurt again or those injuries are still lingering. I think, the medical aspect with him is pretty clean, but it's still the question of, because he had those injuries, the production was never really there at Alabama. Even this past season when he was healthy, it just wasn't at a level where I think teams are going to get excited to pick him in the 1st round. And he had the good game against Arkansas. He had a couple good games here and there, but it wasn't like he dominated at all last season. I think that's probably the biggest question that teams will have, because he does have the height, weight, speed, the size to him. He looks like an NFL pass rusher. It's just a matter of, does that translate to success at the NFL level? And there's a little bit of a leap of faith that I think teams will have to make. And because of that, he's probably going to get devalued and pushed down a little bit. Second round is probably a safe spot for him. I've seen him as low as the mid to the early to mid third round. I think I would be surprised if he goes quite that deep, but I would also be surprised if he gets taken in the middle part of the first round or even the late part of the first round. I think second round is a pretty safe bet for him. And again, he's going to have to prove a little bit at the NFL level that I don't think he fully proved at the collegiate level.
All right, let's put a big bow on this. Any surprises or anything that kind of stands out to you about, any of the other Alabama players that we haven't mentioned specifically, or just any surprises that you're kind of anticipating for, tonight or the remaining rounds at the NFL draft?
Yeah, I mean, Trayvon Diggs is a guy, we didn't mention because he wasn't invited to the virtual draft. But I think he's the most intriguing guy in terms of where he's going to go.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen him as high as the middle part of the first round. I've seen him as low as the third round. I've seen all over the second round for him. It's just a really polarizing prospect where I think there's some scouts out there who really look at the LSU game and what happened against Jamar Chase as a pretty big negative for him. And I think there's scouts who look at him skipping the Citrus Bowl, him skipping the Senior Bowl, and just not really getting a whole lot out of him in terms of scouting, this process. I think he thought he was going to have a pro day at Alabama and kind of show himself off then, but that never happened. And he skipped some drills at the combine as well. So teams are going to look at that and put some question marks on him. But then I think coaches are going to look at him. And I mean, this guy looks like an NFL cornerback. He's got the size that coaches really want at that spot. And the measurables in terms of, what he might bring athletically, and certainly the bloodlines with his brother as well. And I think there's going to be a team that's enticed by him enough to pick him late first, early second. I think that's probably the sweet spot for him. But I wouldn't be surprised with a whole lot about him. And that's one of the things I'm watching, where you feel like his name could just be called at any point.
Yeah, sure. Certainly should be interesting. And it kind of makes you wonder, just in this draft process, how they decided who was going to be invited to the virtual draft, what sort of went into the thinking behind that. The fact that he wasn't invited, does that have anything to do with the fact that he sat out some of those games, personality? There's so many different things that go into it. So I'm definitely curious to kind of know what the thinking behind all that was, but definitely anxious to see how all this plays out. We're all going to be sitting at home watching this, and we haven't had a lot of sports lately. We've been talking about it, but haven't been able to watch much of anything. So definitely anxious to watch and to see sort of how things shake out. And, I know they won't be spending thousands of dollars on suits, I guess, but hey, I mean, somebody will probably come up with something interesting and entertaining for us to talk about, I'm sure.
It's always probably the most exciting day of the year for me. Even, tomorrow night as well, we get 2 more rounds, which is nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than just 1 round. So I'm looking forward to it.
Whoop, whoop. Sounds good. Well, thank you, Mike. We appreciate the insight as always. And we will check back in with you tomorrow to kind of recap round 1 of the NFL draft. And again, thank you so much, and hope you're at home and staying safe.
You too. Thank you.